There we go. All right, so we're going to be in Daniel 7, and if you were here last week, we kind of talked about this is where we start to make this switch, okay? So the first 6 chapters of Daniel are all the events that happen to Daniel while he's in Babylon. And so a lot of it is focused on that. This next chapter 7 is going to be the conclusion of the vision that is given to Daniel concerning Babylon and concerning what is getting ready to happen in the world. When we get to chapter 8, we're going to switch gears completely and we're going to go to Israel. So all of the visions that happen in 8 through 12 are going to be concerning Israel. Okay? So this is kind of our last little switch over from Hebrew into the Aramaic, or from the Aramaic back into the Hebrew and things like that. All right. So chapter 6 is the famous Daniel in the lion's den. So that is kind of where we ended, with Daniel being pulled out of the lion's den. And in verse 28 of chapter 6, it says, "So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian." So that kind of encapsulates his last couple of years and his last couple of times with Babylon. And now we're going to take a gigantic step backwards. Okay, so we're going to go backwards in time in this first verse of chapter 7. And it says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon." Okay, so we're going back past Darius, back into Belshazzar time period. Okay, "Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter." Okay, so this event takes place between chapters 4 and 5. So remember we talked about this timeline of if we split Daniel in half, then we take the second half and kind of put it over the first half. This is what we're doing here. So imagine this is kind of between 4 and 5. Now this vision that came to Daniel happens after Nebuchadnezzar, but right before the Medo-Persians come and attack. Okay, so they have not come and attacked yet. King Belshazzar is on the throne of Babylon, and he is ruling right now. So Belshazzar, we know, starts his co-reign in 553. So that would make Daniel about 66 at this time. Okay, so we're in 553 BC, and our Daniel is about 66. So he's about 66 years old. Okay, so remember at the end of chapter 6, he's 80. We're going to go back to when he was about 66. All right, so if you remember King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2, this is about 40 years later, and it's going to mimic a lot of things. So if you remember that dream, a lot of it's going to sound very similar to that dream. Okay, so Daniel has this vision of the succession of empires that is getting ready to happen. Okay. But the thing you have to remember is the perspective here. Nebuchadnezzar, when he had this vision, he saw these great empires. Remember the statue and all of these great metals and things like that. Okay, so that was from man's perspective. We're going to see the exact same thing, but from God's perspective. Okay, so it's going to be very, very different, but talking about the same events, just from a different perspective. All right, so this first vision is one of 4 described between Daniel 7 and Daniel 12, and it's the most comprehensive. So we're going to get a big old overview, and then the other visions that are going to follow are going to kind of work in this big time frame. Okay, so it's important to understand chapter 7, because 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 all kind of work in it.
So the dream here that Daniel sees from God's perspective, correct?
Right, okay. Yes. All right. So let's start in verse 2. It says, "Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Okay? And 4 great beasts came out of the sea, different from one another." Okay? So Daniel's asleep one night. He's laying down in his bed, and all of a sudden he has this vision/dream. Now remember, sometimes it's kind of overlap. We don't know if he's asleep or this is an angelic vision, or he's just having a dream, but God is intervening in his dream. Okay, so this sea that he sees is probably the Mediterranean, and we know that because each of the 4 beasts are going to represent 4 kingdoms, and they all have mention the geographical connection to the Mediterranean Sea. So he probably is thinking of the Mediterranean Sea here, and then the winds that come up from the 4 different parts is what we know of God's sovereign power. We know in Psalms 35 and in Isaiah 27 and lots of other places that when God talks about the four winds, it's his hand and his sovereign power over the earth. Okay? So Daniel sees this wind come up from the sea and these four gigantic beasts rise out of the sea. These animals we're going to get to see are absolutely ferocious beasts. Okay, these are not puppies, right? These are not like little doves. These are four horrifying beasts that show up out of this great sea, and he tells us that they're distinct from one another. So they're very, very different from one another. All right, so then he's going to go into describing each of the beasts. Verse 4. The first one was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then I looked, and its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And the mind of the man was given to it. Okay, so that's the first beast. And behold, another beast, the second one like a bear, and it rose up on one side. So imagine this bear is kind of like going like this. He's rising up on one side. Okay? And it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, arise and devour much flesh. Okay, so that's the second beast. Verse 6, after this I looked, and behold another, so this is the third one, like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads. Okay, and dominion was given to it. Okay, so these are the first 3 beasts, and we're going to talk about them first, because the fourth is very, very different from these 3. All right, so we have the first beast, and it was like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. Okay, so we would look at that and go, what does that mean, God? I have no idea what this means. When Daniel saw it, this is what Daniel saw. This is a lion with wings like, okay? This is a lion with wings. This was all over the palace in Babylon. Daniel would have walked by things like this and seen this. He knows exactly what this is. This is Babylon, okay? So this is exactly what he's seeing that rises out of the earth. It rises out of the sea, and he sees a lion with wings and goes, that's Babylon. I know that. I know that symbol. I see it all over the place. Okay? So he knows exactly what this is. This is a majestic beast. This huge lion with these wings come up. Okay? But it's humbled. Okay? A hand comes down and it plucks the wings off. Okay? And we're told that it was told to rise up and stand up on 2 feet and given a mind like a man. Who does this sound like? Nebuchadnezzar. This mirrors that vision that Nebuchadnezzar was given about the tree and how he was humbled. Okay, so Daniel knows exactly who this is because Nebuchadnezzar has now passed. Okay, remember we're in Belshazzar territory. Nebuchadnezzar has passed away. So he knows that God is confirming that this is Nebuchadnezzar. This is Babylon. Okay. Daniel would have known all of this that was going on. All right. So Jeremiah uses the lion and the eagle in Jeremiah 49 to talk about Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. And these are all over the place. So we have lots and lots of confirmation. This is definitely Babylon. All right. So the second one, this beast is like a bear. Okay. So then Daniel sees this second beast rise up, and it's like a bear. Now, a bear is a little slower than a lion, okay, but they are much stronger than a lion. They absolutely come crushing with power. They could just crush a lion into pieces, okay? So we have this bear, but we are told that it is told, arise and devour much flesh, okay? So this bear has a ferocious appetite, and it is coming for conquest. This is Medo-Persia, okay? Because we're told that when it arises one side higher than the other, okay? So we know that when the Medo-Persians rise, the Medes rise first, and then Persian comes and it just absolutely dominates over Medes. That's why you hear a lot more about the Persians than you do the Medes. We hear Medes and we go, who are the Medes? And that time, the Medes were coming to their power, okay? Persia was coming right behind it, but it would rise up after it. All right. So we think that the 3 ribs, which is a little interesting, is that this bear, he's got a stack of ribs in its mouth. It's not because he's at a barbecue, okay? He has these ribs in his mouth, and we know from history that Medo-Persia has 3 great conquests: Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia. So that was their main focus, was those 3 conquests that they went out to devour, okay? So the crushing armies of Medo-Persia are well documented in history, okay? They just overwhelmed in battle, okay? Their size and their strength was just unmatched because there was actually these two kingdoms that were co-reigning together, and they just overwhelmed their enemies, okay? So they arise and devour much flesh because they absolutely had these cruelties in Persia. And if anybody knows what we talked about last week, what was the Persian rule when you got in trouble? Your whole family got in trouble with you. Okay, that's a Persian rule. That's not a Hebrew thing, that's not a Babylonian thing. That's a Persian rule. Okay, so we know that they were absolutely known for their cruelty. Okay, all right, and then we have this third animal, and it looks like a leopard. Now, in that ancient time, a leopard was known for their swiftness. Okay, they were very swift, and they attacked unexpectedly. Okay, they just would come out of nowhere and just take down their prey. All right, and this one was especially fast because it has 4 wings. Okay, if an animal today had 4 wings, it probably wouldn't go anywhere, right? But the symbol is that it was very, very swift and quick. It has 4 wings. It also has 4 heads. Okay, now again, if we had a creature that had 4 heads, it probably wouldn't go anywhere, right? You've seen those turtles that have 2 heads and they can't even walk because one's trying to go this way, one's trying to go this way. Well, the symbol is that it was so intelligent. Okay, we're going to see this number 4 rise up out of this beast multiple times. When we get there, we're going to talk about it. Okay? So each one of these animals is very mighty, but it's very different and distinct. Okay, the way that they dominate their prey is very, very distinct from one another. The lion devours, the bear crushes, and the leopard springs on its attack. Okay, now this leopard represents the Greek Empire. Okay, and Alexander the Great was so quick in the way that he came upon the scene and conquered the entire known world. He was only 28 by the time he accomplished that. Okay? 28 years old and ruling most of the entire world. That's quick, y'all. That's quick. Okay? Because he probably wouldn't have been able to be even in the army until he was about 16 to 18, somewhere in that time frame. That is not a whole lot of time to conquer the whole world. Okay? Very, very swift. Very, very intelligent. Alexander the Great was incredibly intelligent. Okay? But at his death, his empire gets divided into 4. Okay? This hasn't happened yet for Daniel. Daniel doesn't even know what's going to get ready to happen. Okay? Because Babylon is the great empire of the day. Okay? The Medo-Persians are coming up on their tail. Greek is barely in existence. Okay? They are the low man on the totem pole. Okay? They do not even get in the middle of fights. They stay out of stuff because they are so low man on the totem pole. Okay? But Daniel is given this vision of this leopard, and this is the Greek Empire. Okay? Daniel would not have known about the Greek Empire rising to power, and he wouldn't have known that it was going to be divided into 4. Okay? So we have this 4 repeated time and time again. Alexander the Great, when he dies, his 4 generals are rising to power, and the whole area gets divided into 4. All right. So this shows us. This whole vision shows us that God lives outside of our time frame, right? We have to experience time one day at a time, okay? Maybe a little bit further than that. One day at a time is how we experience it. God sees it all, okay? It's not like a parade that's just going in front of him. He has seen the beginning from the end. He can look down and see every bit of it, even stuff that hasn't happened for us yet, okay? So this is what he's doing for Daniel. Daniel has not experienced any of this yet except for Babylon. He saw Babylon's rise to power, and he saw Nebuchadnezzar be humbled. He has not seen anything else yet.
And does he stay alive long enough to see that?
No.
Okay.
Only the rise of Medo-Persia. After that, he passes away. But he doesn't see anything past that. Yep. All right, so let's move into verse 7. And after this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. Okay, and the Hebrew, this is the most terrifying thing I have ever seen in my entire life. Okay, Daniel and this 4th beast, he wrestles with this idea of this 4th beast for a long time. Several parts in the next couple of chapters, Daniel is absolutely terrified of this 4th beast. And he is so terrified that he doesn't even tell us what it looks like. Okay, we don't know what animal is represented by this fourth beast. This is how terrifyingly twisted and just overwhelming this beast is that he can't even put it into words. He's like, I have never seen anything like this in my entire life. Okay, so he is terrifying, dreadful, and exceedingly strong, and it had great iron teeth. So the only thing he can focus on right now is he just sees those teeth, these iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet, right? So it wasn't enough to just kill something, right? It wasn't enough to just take the predator down. It's like literally trampling all over it, all right? And it was different from all the beasts out before it, and it had 10 horns, okay? Now, horns in the ancient world were symbols of power, okay? So if animals had horns, they were very majestic, powerful beasts, okay? So that's what these horns represent. Just absolute power, and there's 10 of them. Or ever seen the number 10 before? Number of 10 toes. Okay, so we know what this is, right? We know that this is the feet and the toes. All right, so it was different from all the beasts, and it had 10 horns. And I considered the horns, which means he focuses in on these horns, because there's something different about these horns, okay? He's moved past the teeth, and he sees the horns. He doesn't tell us what the rest of the body looks like, but he sees these horns. So he considers the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, okay, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots, okay? So there's 10 horns, 3 of them get plucked out, and a little one grows up, okay? Just a little one, little horn grows up. This little horn is going to cause a lot of problems. Okay, but it's interesting that he tells us it's just a little horn. In comparison to all these other horns, it's just a little horn. Okay, it's so before it, the 3 first horns were plucked up by their roots, and behold, in this horn, in the little horn, were eyes like the eyes of man. Okay, and a mouth speaking great things. It's a little tiny horn, but it's got eyes and it's got a mouth on it. Okay, this little tiny horn. All right. It is very terrifying.
I'm like envisioning that right now, and
that is terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely terrifying. Yeah, so massive. I mean, you've probably seen predators. You've probably seen them on the Discovery Channel, like these big ferocious beasts coming your way. Imagine one so ferocious that you don't even have words. Like you can't even be like, this is uncomparable to anything I've ever seen, I've ever laid eyes on. This beast is so horrifying. Okay? All right. So we have the 10 toes, the 10 horns, okay? And we have this little one that has a big old mouth on it, okay? And it has eyes like men, okay? So we're going to remember that little tiny beast, that little tiny horn. Well, in verse 9, Daniel then switches, okay? So he sees these 4 beasts come out of this ocean, and he's just utterly terrified of all of the things, and he knows what these are, okay? He knows what these are. God gave him the interpretation, which we're going to get to. And he is just inside of his head, and he's like, oh my God, what's going to happen to us? What is going to happen to our world? And he's focusing on these horns, and then it switches in verse 9, okay? And Daniel says, as I looked, thrones were placed, okay? So it's like God just kind of wipes away this vision, and he gives him another one, okay? And he says, as he's looking, this whole thing kind of just like dissolves in a dream, right? And he sees thrones that come up and were established. And the Ancient of Days took his seat, okay? His clothes were white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning with fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him, and 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. Okay? So if Daniel wasn't terrified enough, right? Now we have this judge who comes and sits down, and there's fire. Okay? This judge is in pure white. He has head like pure wool. That's not the color, that would be the texture. Okay? And we have fire. His whole throne is just engulfed in fire. Okay? Fiery flames, and the wheels are fire, and there's basically lava coming down from it. okay? And Daniel looks, and instead of the sea, and instead of these 4 beasts, he sees 1,000 servants, angels, and he sees 10,000 times 10,000. Daniel can't even count all these people that are standing before the throne, okay? And then he said the court sat in judgment, and the books were all open. So Daniel sees a courtroom scene happen before him. Now Daniel lives in a palace. He has seen this multiple times happen. Because what would happen in a palace is they would bring the guilty party forward, and the king would sit in judgment, and the books were open, and witnesses came forth. Daniel knows exactly what this is. This is not new to Daniel, okay? He knows that this is a scene of judgment that is happening, okay? So, the Ancient of Days is obviously God. We have God the Father here, distinct from God the Son, because we're getting ready in verse 13 to talk about the Son of Man, who is absolutely distinct from the Ancient of Days, okay? So these are not the same person, right? So his throne was a fiery flame. We just have the absolute splendor of God, but also the separation, okay? This flame kept people separated. This was his judgment, okay? And there's just this lava that is pouring down out of his throne. Just destruction and judgment coming from it. Now, the wheels are interesting because we see wheels and we're like, why is his throne on wheels, right? He doesn't have to go anywhere, right? But that is what a throne in the ancient world would look like, because sometimes they did have to pick them up and take them places, okay? They would move around, okay? So it's very reminiscent of the royalty that Daniel would have understood. And then we have 1,000 thousands, just this unmatched number of angels that are standing around, and 10,000 times 10,000 are just standing there. Did you notice that they're standing there in the midst of all of this flames and everything? They're not being consumed by the lava and the flames. They are able to stand before the throne and the one who is seated on the throne. Okay? So the court is seated and the books are open. Now, people ask, what are the books? We don't know. Daniel doesn't tell us. Do we have a good idea? Probably. We have Psalm 69:28. It talks about the book of the living. Okay, so it records everyone who has ever lived on earth, the book of the living. Malachi 3:16 talks about a book of remembrance, that God has this book that he writes things down into remembrance. Does God need to forget? No. It's very reminiscent of law and things like that, that they would go back to the books and royalty because a king couldn't remember everything, right? So they wrote stuff down to refer back to, but it's kind of similar to that. And then in Philippians 4, and then lots of places in Revelation, we have the book of life. Those who will enter the kingdom of God, because if your name is not found in the book of life, you do not get to enter into eternity. Different from the book of living, if you drew breath, you're in the book of living. Book of life, you get to have eternal life. Okay? So these books, or probably a combination of these books, or some other kind of books, it might have been a book of judgment, there could have been all kinds of different books, but we know that there's all these books that are open. Okay? So Daniel sees all of this, and he knows what this is. This is time for judgment.
When it refers to the court was seated, is that referring to a person or?
It's probably the assembly with God. It was very much an Old Testament Hebrew idea that God had like a court of advisors. Not necessarily that he would need their advice, but that there was these thrones. And we see in Revelation that the thrones are the 12 disciples and then the 12 sons of Jacob, that they sit on the thrones. So it could be here that we have 12, we're not really told. So it seems to just be this consensus of like, if you walked into a courtroom and you saw a whole bunch of the jury seats, that they would sit, and then the judge would come in and he would sit, you would know, okay, court's coming, right? So Daniel was seeing that picture. The witnesses are coming, the jury's coming, the judge is seated, like everybody's ready. This is judgment time. Okay, good questions. All right, so verses 11 through 14 said, I looked then because of the sound of the great words of the horn that was speaking. How big is our horn? This is a little tiny horn on the beast, right? He's got a big old mouth on him though, and he starts talking. Okay? And as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion were taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Okay, so Daniel sees this court of judgment getting ready to be taken place. And then he sees the 4 beasts that are over here, and this little tiny horn starts talking. Okay? Could you imagine? Right? The mouth on this thing, the pride of this thing, this little tiny horn starts talking to the judge. We don't know what it says because God doesn't record it and he doesn't give him time to talk. Okay? He slays the beast and he gives him over to be burned and killed. Okay? And then, judgment and mercy, he does take the dominion away from the other beasts, but he prolongs their life. Okay? So it's very interesting here. We see this balance of judgment and mercy in God. He could have just slain all 4 of them and thrown them all in the fire, right? But he doesn't. All right, so we see this transition of dominion, okay, here. So we have this human dominion that these 4 beasts are going to get to have their time on the earth and their time of dominion. But the Ancient of Days is going to have a judgment time at the end of all of this. At the end of these 4 beasts, the Ancient of Days is there to judge them. Okay, so we have this transition from human to divine dominion, right? And we're going to see what happens in the next section about the Son of Man. Right? So we have the little horn that begins to blaspheme God. He's judged. Okay? And then when God sets up his kingdom, the empire, all of those preceding dominions get absolutely crushed and thrown out of the way. So this is very reminiscent. Remember, we had that huge statue, and then the asteroid that comes and hits it, but it doesn't stop there, right? It then becomes this great mountain. Okay, so all the pictures that Nebuchadnezzar saw, Daniel's seeing the same thing, just differently, from different perspectives. So we're actually seeing it from God's perspective now. He sees these beasts come up and they're just devouring each other, and they're just ferocity, right? There's a little bit of humanity. We have some heads and some eyes, but mostly they're just beasts taking over. And he's the one who gets to sit in judgment, okay? Not a stone that comes along and just turns into a mountain. God sits in judgment, okay? So this is why we know that we're getting it from God's perspective. All right, verse 13 says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Okay, so we have this distinction here, God. Daniel sees the Ancient of Days on the throne as judge, and then a man steps forward. Okay, and he is brought to the Ancient of Days, and the Ancient of Days gives him the dominion. Okay, and it's an everlasting dominion. It shall not pass away, and this kingdom is one, and it shall not be destroyed. Okay, so we have this beautiful picture of, in the midst of all of this judgment that God is taking care of, and he is transitioning from the dominion of man to a divine dominion, that Jesus steps forward. Okay, and he is distinct from the Father, but he steps forward to claim dominion back from the world. Okay, this is an absolute perfect picture of our Jesus, and it is called, he is one like the Son of Man. Going back to the fiery furnace, what does Nebuchadnezzar say? I see one like the Son of God's. Okay, here he's called the Son of Man, and that was Jesus' favorite self-description. It is used 80 times in the gospel, coming from the mouth of Jesus. Okay, that was his favorite description. Where do you think he got it from? He got it from Daniel's description here in Daniel 7, because every time he said it, he's pointing back to this. Okay, I am that Son of Man that Daniel saw, who's going to have my dominion for all eternity. Okay, so every time you're reading the Gospels and you hear Jesus call himself Son of Man, that's what he's pointing back to. He's not just saying I'm a Son of Man, I'm a human. He's saying I'm who Daniel saw. Okay? All right. And then we know that Jesus is going to reign on the earth for 1,000 years. But that's not all that he's going to do. Okay? His dominion will be permanent, but we know there's going to be this specific 1,000 years in Revelation 20 that Jesus is going to reign on the earth, fulfilling the promise. Okay? And Satan is going to be bound. All right? That little horn is going to be bound up. Okay? I love the visuals here that Satan is such a problem for us, but for God, he's just this little tiny horn that's got a big old mouth. Okay? That's how God sees him. Right? Okay. Alright. Verses 15 and 16. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious. Aren't you glad to know that a Bible character dealt with anxiety? Okay? He was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all of this. Okay, so Daniel is absolutely perplexed. He sees all of this going on, but he doesn't go to the Ancient of Days or the Son of Man, right? There's all this fire going on around him. He goes to one standing by, and he asks him, what is going on here? I need you to help me interpret these things. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Okay? So Daniel is taking in all of this, and he's trying to make it compute in his little tiny brain, because he's like, this is overwhelming, guys. What is going on here, right? So he asked for an interpretation. All right, verse 17. So this is what the person tells him, okay? This is a quote. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. Okay? So he doesn't go into a whole lot of detail about the whole 4 beasts right now. Okay? But he tells Daniel, those are 4 kings. You're right. Those are 4 kings. But I'm telling you what's coming after that. Okay? I'm going to tell you that God is going to hand over dominion of the earth to all of these gathered around here. All of these saints here, it belongs to them. Okay? So that's what he tells them. Alright, so this divine interpretation covers some of the same material that we saw in chapter 2 of the rise of the 4 empires, okay, and then God's kingdom afterwards. Nebuchadnezzar saw this present and future world dominions as a statue, right? It was glorious, it was beautiful, it was made of gold and silver and iron, it was majestic and it was beautiful, okay? But God sees the truth. From his perspective, it's these 4 beasts, okay? And they just want to conquer and devour, and usually without even consciousness, okay? These are animals, okay? Absolute animals. But when the day of the 4th beast is over, God's people are going to receive the kingdom, okay? But did you notice that God doesn't have an army there? They are not coming to do war with the 4 beasts. They're literally just standing by as observers and witnesses in the court to what's happening and to God's judgment. And at the end of it, he then gives the kingdom over to them. So all they have to do is receive it. They don't have to go and fight. They don't have to do anything. They are there in the presence of God, and he gives them the kingdom. Okay? He gives it over to them. Okay? All right, so verse 19 says, then I desire to know the truth about the 4th beast. Okay, Daniel sees all of this. That interpretation is not enough. He goes, I need to know more about that 4th beast because it is terrifying. Okay, tell me more about the 4th beast. It was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, and its teeth were iron. You can't get over these teeth of iron. And the claws of bronze, and it which destroyed and broke into pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. So this is just a terrifying image, right? It's just absolutely tearing and clawing and just stamping out everything. And about the 10 horns that were on his head, and the other horn that came up, that was in which before it 3 of them fell. And the horn had eyes and mouth, right? He's telling the angel all of this, as if the angel didn't know all of this, right? He's recapping it all. He has eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companion. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. And the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Okay, so he tells the angel his interpretation of what's going on. I saw this 4th beast arise, and it was just massive, and it was just crushing, and it had 10 horns. 3 of them get removed, and this one little horn comes up, and he's got a mouth on him. And he makes war with the saints. Now remember, the saints there aren't warriors. They're not coming to fight the beast. But this little horn picks a fight, okay? And he says, why was this little horn allowed to do that? Daniel was very concerned about this little horn. Why is he allowed to make war with the saints and prevail over them? He has seen God and every bit of his judgment and all of these legions of angels and all of these people, and this little tiny horn is allowed to prevail over all of them. Daniel's very concerned, right? He's like, why, God, is you allowing this to happen, right? And he says that judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time would come when the saints would possess the kingdom, okay? So Daniel's asking this question, what in the world is going on here? If my God is sitting right there on the throne, why is he allowing all of this to happen? So Daniel's very concerned here. This is where Daniel's heart is. This is what the angel answers him, okay? Thus he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall arise a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it into pieces. Okay, so he's affirming that's exactly true. This is exactly what's going to happen. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be different from the former ones. And he shall put down 3 kings. Okay, he shall speak words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Ooh, if there's any other time that you feel worn out, come back to this verse. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, and be consumed, and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole earth shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all the domain shall serve and obey him. Okay? So, he tells them about this fourth beast. Okay? This is very, very fitting with the Roman Empire that arises after Greece. Okay? It devoured all of the civilized world. Okay? It brought it underneath of its reign. And it actually reigned for about 1,000 years. Okay? So they are in control for about 1,000 years. However, there was never a federation of 10 kings under the Roman Empire. So we do not have this part of the prophecy fulfilled yet. Okay? And we know in Revelation that that is yet future, because John is a long time from now, and he still says it hasn't happened yet. Okay? So it does not happen in the Roman Empire. Alright? And this little horn we know is the Antichrist. If we combine this with what we know of Revelation, we know that this is the Antichrist. Okay? So he is going to remove 3 kings before he comes to power. That's one of the prophecies that have to happen. Okay? Now, going back to that wearing out, this is like wearing out like friction. Okay? Like clothes that wear out. Have you ever worn like your favorite pair of jeans or your favorite shoes, and eventually they just wear out because they can't take it anymore? This is what Satan does to the saints. He just wears them down till they're bare threads, okay? But at the end of it, they are given the entire kingdom, okay? So that while there is this wearing down, that the end of it is that they get to inherit the kingdom, okay? Now, it's interesting that it tells us that they will seek to change the times in the law. And we're like, that's impossible, right? You can't change the times in the law. Well, during the French Revolution of the 1800s, there was actually these radicals that wanted to change the weeks to a 10-day work week. Okay? 5 days is hard enough, right? They wanted to make it a 10-day work week so they could make people work, okay? They did not succeed, thankfully. They did not succeed. Their other goal was that they wanted to change the calendar. So 1792 was when the French Revolution happened. They wanted to mark that as year 1, and they wanted to start all over again from 1792. Thankfully, again, they did not succeed, but they did attempt this, okay? This was part of their changing of the government and the laws and things like this. They very much attempted to do this. They almost succeeded, but they did not succeed, okay? So we're given a glimpse of what the Antichrist is going to do, Okay, he wants to change times and laws. Alright, but the power of that little tiny horn is limited. So we're told a time, times, and half a time. Okay, and we go, what does that mean? Right? Well, it's very easy to interpret. Time is 1 year. Okay, so times would be 2 years. And then half a time would be
6 months.
half a year. So what do we have?
3.5 years.
3.5 years.
So once this one comes to power, it's 3.5 years before it's said and done.
Well, we see this in Revelation. This 3.5 years is divided into two. The pre 3.5 years and the post 3.5 years. Making our 7-year tribulation. Okay? So, he's telling them that this God, this Antichrist, at his highest, he's only going to get 3.5 years. Okay? His total power over the entire world is only going to last 3.5 years. Now, we go 3.5 years, that's nothing, right? We can all remember about 3.5 years ago. But
3.5 years of utter darkness.
Utter darkness, and having this beast reign over you. It is going to feel like an eternity to those people. Absolutely feel like an eternity, but God has put a timestamp on it right now. He's only going to get to serve for 3.5 years. Okay? So, in the day of persecution, by this little tiny horn that's got a big old mouth on him, right? The Messiah is going to come and establish his kingdom. He's going to take it back, and he is going to establish the millennial reign over the earth. Okay? So, since that has not happened yet, we know this is yet future. Okay? So again, we notice that these are future events that are getting ready to happen. Okay? But at the end of it, we get this again, that God is going to give the saints dominion over the entire earth. Okay? That is a promise that is going to happen at the end of all of this. Alright, verse 28 says, "Here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart." Okay? So there are many things about this that trouble Daniel. Daniel is overwhelmed by this vision, but he is especially concerned about that last beast and that little tiny horn. Could you imagine seeing a vision of all of these great, horrific beasts, and you're concerned about one little tiny horn? Daniel knows something is very different about this tiny little horn that's got a big old mouth on him. Okay? He is very, very concerned about this, to where his color changes. Okay? He just drains of his color. Okay? And his thoughts just alarm him. But he keeps it all in his heart. And it's very interesting here that this means that Daniel is absolutely convinced that this is true. That what God has given him is true, and it is going to come to pass. Okay? But he keeps it to himself. And we don't know why. We don't know if Daniel just didn't have anybody he could confide in. Who's the king right now? Belshazzar. He is not impressed with Belshazzar at all. Okay? We know that from the previous chapters. He is not convinced of this king. Okay? He probably would have confided in Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Especially after Nebuchadnezzar's conversion. But he's not impressed with this king who's here right now. Okay? And we also don't know what happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We are not told anything that happens to them after chapter 3. That's the last time we hear of them. So we don't know what happens to them. They might have died by this point. We're also never told if Daniel had a family. Okay? He served in the palace. He probably could have dedicated his entire life to the service of the king and never had a family of his own. So Daniel could have been probably very, very alone in all of this and not had anybody he could confide in. But it's just as true as that he did have a family, and he did have friends, and he did have friends in the palace. But he was so overwhelmed and distraught by this vision that he probably thought that they weren't going to believe him. Right? If somebody came to you and told you about this vision, you would say, I think
That's a weird dream.
It is a weird dream. I don't think that's from God, right?
Or could he have also been worried that it was too much for anyone else to handle? Not necessarily that they wouldn't believe it, but like, I'm so overwhelmed by it.
Just reading it.
Right.
And he saw it. He experienced it in the vision. He was there.
So to put that feeling on, maybe he didn't want to, I mean, and stuff,
Right.
inside, so to speak.
Right. So we see this character of Daniel, that God has given him this vision, and he wrote it down because we have it, And he says, I wrote it down, but we're told that he doesn't share this with anybody else. That he keeps this locked away in his heart. Okay? So although this is frightening, Daniel holds on to it, and he makes sure that it's recorded because he is absolutely convinced that this is a word from God. Even as absolutely terrifying as it is, he knows that this is from God. So he records it down. So even as terrible and awful, horrible as this vision is, it's still a word from God. Okay? And we should not be afraid of it. We should not be afraid to study this. Okay? God, at the end of the day, is still on his throne. And Satan, for all of his ferocity, is a little tiny horn with a big old mouth. Okay? That's all he is in the eyes of God. And that's nothing. Okay? God controls every single part of human history. Okay? And though there are battles, because it tells us that the little tiny horn is going to prevail over all of these things, okay? At the end of the day, guess who gets dominion over the whole earth? All the saints. It's not given to the horn. The horn tries to fight for it, but it's ultimately given to the saints. Okay? So God has already won the war, and he's trying to tell Daniel this. He wants Daniel to focus on the kingdom. That's why it's repeated so many times here in the short little couple verses. He's like, Daniel, yeah, but the saints get it. The saints get dominion. The saints are going to be handed. Daniel, I want you to focus on this part. And Daniel goes, I have concerns about the horn, God. Can you tell me a little bit more about this horn? Anybody read Revelation and they go, tell me about the bowls and tell me about the seals and tell me about these beasts and tell me. And God says, did you not read chapter 22? I win at the end. There's a whole new earth and a whole new heaven and a whole new Jerusalem. And you're going to get all of this peace. And we go, yeah, God, so there's 7 bowls, right? So what? Exactly how many is right? Daniel's exactly like us, right? He sees all of this. He sees God in his judgment. He sees saints that he can't even count standing before the throne. And he goes, now what about that horn? That horn is so concerning. That horn is given so much dominion and power. That horn wears out your saints, God. I'm really terrified of that horn. And he hides all of that fear and anxiety in his heart. When God is trying to move him through God and through the angel, tell him, yeah, but Daniel, but at the end of the day, Daniel, I'm still on my throne. And all these people are here. All these nations and languages are here standing before my throne. They're not bowing down in fear. They don't have their face in the ground. I'll tell you what, that's the first thing that's going to happen to me when I get there. My face is going to be in the ground. They're standing before their God, able to stand and receive the judgment. Okay? And God hands them not judgment, he hands them whole kingdom. Okay? It tells us that the reason why they're standing there is to be judged. But they're never judged in this passage. Now we do it here in Revelation that we are judged. Okay? But here, we're told they stand in judgment. God gives them power. And he gives them grace. And he hands over everything that belongs to him to his people. Okay? So God wants Daniel to focus on this because this is not the end of Daniel's vision. God is going to give him several more visions. And he's even going to send angels to talk to Daniel. Daniel, I don't want you to be afraid of that little tiny horn. Okay? I've got some big plans for my people. Okay? So this is not the end of Daniel's vision. In chapter 8, Daniel's going to have a vision of a ram and a goat. Okay? So it's going to be one of the beasts, one of the Dominion kingdoms we're going to get a little bit more information on. Okay? And we're going to see why. Now that Daniel has the framework, God gives him a couple of years to kind of process all of this. Right? We're going to go forward a little bit. And then he's going to give him more. And he's going to give him a little bit of time to process, and he's going to give him more. Okay? So that's where we're heading for the next couple of chapters. We're going to get some more visions. Alright, so any questions about the framework? Because the framework is important for understanding the rest of it. We're going to come back to all these different parts of this framework here. I'm really glad that God gives Daniel a little bit of processing time, right? And you're going to get a week until we get to chapter 8, the next vision, to process this vision because it is terrifying and it's absolutely scary. But at the end of the day, we can go, but we win.
Why is it so hard for us to still focus on that evil?
Because that's where we suffer. That's where we're worn out. We still have that promise that we're going to get worn out and suffer. And it's so hard to know when you're suffering. At the end of it, all that suffering is just gonna be wiped away, right? Because God can just,
Right.
but He doesn't. He allows it to happen. But we're seeing it from His perspective. Because remember, in the statue, all we got was the statue and the rock. We don't even get people. But in this midst of this whole court scene, we see not only angels, but we see even more humans who outnumber the angels thousands of folds. And they are standing there. And Daniel gets to see all of that. And God says, watch what I'm going to do. But we focus on that horrible part. We focus on that little tiny horn with a big mouth. We focus on that 3.5 years. We focus on being worn out because that's what we have to deal with. And it's so hard.
Satan wants us to. That's how he distracts us.
Absolutely. That horn had a big old mouth on it. Okay? Could you imagine this little tiny horn talking before a judge who's surrounded by fire?
No.
And he still can't keep his mouth shut. That's Satan.
I wonder, like the other people that are sitting there just looking at him like, can you just?
Yeah, can you just stop talking? Can you just stop talking for 5 minutes? And he's still talking. And he's still blaspheming God. He's just a little tiny horn. Big old mouth. That's all Satan is. So the next time you're being worn out, just tell Satan who he really is. Say, Satan, I know who you are. You're a little tiny horn with a big old mouth. But my God is the God who sits on the throne of fire, and I get to stand before him, not you. And God's going to take you out.